first of all, thanks very much for being here tonight and for having me as a demonstrator. My goal is that we have fun tonight, we enjoy our time together, and we learn some things. This is an interactive demo, so please, if you have questions, ask the questions in real time. We'll make the time for that. This actual demo is probably something that could be done over a period of a half a day. So I brought along some props. These are the 5 stages of the process. And I did spend a fair amount of time working on these at home over the last few days. This is pretty much what I start with. I'll put this, there's no picture in front of me.
I got you over there.
And I'm just gonna keep on going because we're tight on time anyway. So for tonight's demonstration, I basically started out with a piece of cherry, about 3.5 by 3.5 by 8 inches or so. You can use any type of wood that you have. There are all kinds of different woods that are easily turned into trees. You can use cherry wood, you can use maple, you can use basswood, you can use all different kinds of woods. They turn differently, they texture differently, they hold detail differently, and I guess one of the key things I'm trying to encourage tonight is just have fun and play. And this is a fairly straightforward project to do. I'll send some things around for you to take a look at also as we go through the process. So, yes, sir?
What would you prefer that does hold the detail for the texture? Or wood?
I think cherry and maple and actually basswood handles detail very, very well. If you get into some of the hard oaks and some of the harder exotic woods, it does not take the detail very well. I know that's probably a completely different kind of approach than those who are doing ornamental turning, where if you start with some really, really hard exotic type woods that hold detail from a metal cutter, you'll go that route with the hard exotics. But I would say a medium hard to hard works best. Like I said, cherry, maple, those kinds of woods are the ones that I find work well. And this is basswood. So my question is, where would you like me to start? We can start with this block of wood and take a fair amount of time. I'm seeing some heads shake. Basically, the second step is where I turn this and I put a tenon on it. And I put that tenon on it because I want to turn this around and put it in the chuck and give myself a nice firm base to do the turning and then also doing a texturing. Pretty straightforward. Those of you who have a lathe, how many of you are capable of turning that? Okay, so you don't need to see me do that. That's the second phase. The third phase, I have it chucked in the lathe. I now have it, I take out a ruler and I measure where I want the different sections to be. And I also make sure I save some room down here to turn a base and to give some room for the trunk of the tree. All right. I'm seeing a lot of glare here, so I'm not sure. Can you guys see it down here?
Turn it sideways.
On the screen?
The camera that's being used is over here.
All right.
This one got unplugged.
Everybody see that okay?
Yep.
So we could start at this phase. I can put this in the chuck and I can start working from there. The next phase is basically having turned those levels, kind of roughed them out a little bit, basically using a spindle gouge, leaving room where the trunk would be and where I need to part this off from the chuck, but also leaving enough room so when I'm doing the texturing, I've got a firm foundation to do the texturing or the wire burning or whatever else. I'm gonna do the texturing on this straight piece, but then if we have time, we can do this, or I can do it, start it here, and if we have time, do the various texturing on this piece. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious about how you kind of determine the pitch, if you will, of the tree and how much each layer lays over the one before it? So
Yeah.
do you have a formula or something?
No, that's a great question. The question is, how do you determine the shape or the pitch or the number of levels in the tree, right? I think part of that is just really playing. Part of it is design. Part of it is what's appealing to the eye. Over the years, my tree designs have changed dramatically. They used to be more straight. Some were concave.
Do you have any templates?
I have no templates. I have no templates. I think the ratio of the diameter of the base to the height of the tree kind of falls into some of the similar ratios that we use for other types of design work. I think the size of the base, and I encourage you to look at other trees that are out there on YouTube and elsewhere. I think some people make really bulky bases or odd looking bases, or the trunks are not the right diameter for the size of a tree. There are a lot of design elements that go into a fairly simple design like a tree. In this particular one, I have 6 levels. You could put 7 or 8 or 9 or 12 different levels, whatever you prefer. And some of the trees that I'll pass around have different numbers of levels. Some people believe that an odd number is more appealing than an even number. I've seen even numbers work just fine. This one happens to be an even number. Yeah, Bruce.
Paul, when you're shaping that tree, do you start from the top and go down, or bottom and up?
So when I have this chucked in the lathe, I'm actually starting with a spindle roughing gouge. And again, I'm happy to do this, but it takes time to do it in the setup. So we can cover a lot more this way, but I'll definitely do the texturing for you live with the different texturing tools on this piece of wood, okay? But I basically am using a spindle roughing gouge, starting from the right-hand side and reducing this down and coming up with a curve that I find appealing. And I'm trying to come up with a fairly nice design at this phase. This is where the shape happens. It happens pretty early in the process. And if I leave this straight or if I leave it concave, I'll come up with a completely different design. And as I said, I found that coming up with a concave shape like this, I could even take that in further, but you know, we're wood turners, right? So a lot of times we're reluctant to lose wood. We're trying to get the most wood out of the piece possible. And I've had to overcome that, you know? I've learned that I need to get thinner and thinner up here, and sometimes, you know, you don't want to give up that wood. But from a design standpoint, you'll be happy at the end that you made it thinner as you taper down. That said, you want it to be a smooth curve. Again, these design elements that we see in vessels and bowls and other turnings, this curve, it's really, really important that when you're doing this and as you get better and better and better, that you pay attention to that curve. And a lot of the design elements in the, you know, that we read about in the proportions are in that curve. So after you put in these lines, after you put in these pencil lines, then I go in with a skew just to delineate those lines with a sharp, you can go in with a thin parting tool if you want, just underneath where the next level begins and mark off. I would say go in a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch. You have to think about how far you're going to go in and what that angle is going to be. Are you going to make it a curve inward? Are you going to make it straight? Are you going to make it concave? Here's where you can play with the shape of each of those levels.
How do you determine where the pencil lines are going to be?
Well, that's a great question. How do I determine where the pencil lines are going to be? I take out a ruler. And I like to have one that's about 14 inches long. I basically measure the point from what I've determined to be the bottom of my tree to the very top. And in this case, it's about 6 inches. And in this case, I said, well, let's make 1-inch sections. The one thing you have to keep in mind is this piece, the top piece, is being held on with a live center, and there's usually a point in there. And when you eventually take that off, you're going to have a hole in the middle of it, and you don't want to have a hole in the middle of the top of your tree. So give yourself a little bit of room. So if I'm going to err on the side of which side of that line I'm going to put these marks with my skew or with a sharp tool or with a parting tool, it's going to be on the left-hand side of that line so that I have enough here at the top. Now, you may decide that you want to make the bottom one 1 inch, and this one 7/8, and this one 3/4, and this one, you may want to taper that. You may want to play with that design and those proportions and see what that looks like. I am in the midst of discovery here with all of these trees, and I'm playing with those kinds of things, and I find that having them kind of equal works for me for now. But that may change over time as I get feedback and I start to look at different designs and different treatments for the trees. Some of the other ones that I'll pass around, this one has 5 sections. I will say that the bigger the piece, the bigger the square, the larger the diameter that you start with, the more of a taper you can put in there. It makes just sense, right? You have more room to start with, you can taper that. This one that's going around is one of my favorite from the standpoint of proportions. It's got bigger at the bottom and then tapers really, really nicely to the top. Here's some others, I'll just give you a bunch of these to take a look at. This is another one that also I think has some nice proportions. There's only 5 sections. This one has 2, 4, this has 8. So when you start with a thinner, taller piece, 4, I don't know how many are on there, but there's a bunch of that. The thinner, taller piece, you only have so much room to taper, and that affects your design.
Paul,
Yes?
when you're doing the texturing itself, do you need to keep it between centers because of the force you're pushing on it, or can you have it in the scroll chuck only?
I think you can have it between centers. I feel
You
more.
try and do that so you have a supported look on it.
I feel more comfortable having it in the chuck when I'm doing a tree. The question was, can you do the texturing between a live center and a drive center, or do you have to have it in a chuck?
Well,
And
no,
it,
I'm sorry, maybe you just misunderstood me. Can you just do it in the chuck, or is it best to do it between centers because of the support of each other?
Support the tailstock.
oh, I usually have the tailstock attached to it until the very, very end. The last thing I do when I'm parting the tree off, and I've got all these different, stages, and this is a stage right here where I've sanded it. I've got the proportions pretty close to where I want to be. I've turned the trunk to a thickness that I think is appropriate for that size of a tree. I haven't done any texturing yet, but I've left that on there so I can put this on the lathe, and when I'm putting some detail on now, I'm holding this in the chuck. I'm going to put some fine lines in there, perhaps maybe some wire burning in that, and I'm going to be applying pressure. I usually apply downward pressure. I've seen other demos where they say use the wire from the bottom up. That to me seems odd. But when I start here, that's not a problem. When I start at the thick level, it's not a problem. It's going to be true, and it's going to, it's going to hang. It's going to burn real quick. The surface speed is also faster with a thicker layer. So when you're applying a wire, it's going to burn a lot quicker, a lot easier on the thicker layer than out here. Because here the surface speed is a lot less. So you're getting less friction there as well. So when I'm out here at the top, the tip, applying downward pressure on a wire or a texturing tool, that's where I need that support up here at the live center point. Does that make sense? So could you do it? I think if it was a thick enough piece and a hard enough piece of wood, you probably could, and especially if you were supporting it maybe with a support system or a support jig, or maybe even holding it by hand, but that makes it almost impossible to use a wire unless you have a third hand there somewhere. Okay, so you're going to be applying pressure, downward pressure along the whole length of this. Where are you going to need more support? You're going to want consistent support along the whole piece. And sometimes as I go further from the thick to the thin, I'll actually turn that speed up to compensate for the reduced surface speed so that it stays at a nice speed. Otherwise, it's a nice dark burn over here and it's a kind of a lighter burn over here. Make sense? Okay. The texturing techniques that I use on most of the trees are from really a handful of tools. The simplest technique for putting some sort of decoration or accent on it is to put a simple single or double line on the wood. And you can do that with a sharp tip tool. You can do that with the tip of a skew chisel. And for some trees with certain patterns, with certain grains, that's enough. You don't even have to burn it. You can just put a wire or just a fine cut. I think there's a couple going around that you can see that. There's not even a wire burn. There's simply a very, very fine cut. It's on some of the smaller ones, I think. And to me, the second degree of decoration is the application of a wire to do some burning to accentuate those lines. So once you get past the single line with a sharp tool or a wire burn, then we're talking about these different texturing techniques that I've found useful. I use a Wagner tool to do a lot of this, the texturing that you see on the trees.
Can you put it right over the spindle?
And you can see I put the name of the tool on there as well. These three sections, and I will duplicate all of these for you in a few minutes. We started out with a simple Wagner tool. We applied pressure, created a pattern, and then I put a single line on each side of the pattern to kind of define that pattern in that space. And then I use the wire to burn those lines. And then I put the colored marker, in this case, a blue marker in there. So there's really like 4 separate things that go into that little design. The next one was using a wider version of the Wagner tool. It comes in 2 different widths. It comes in 2 different threads per inch. So they're called Wagner tools because some guy named Wagner found a way to market these to woodworkers. I suspect those of you who have been exposed to metalworking and other kinds of work know that this type of pattern has been around for a long time. And these were purchased from Craft Supplies out in Utah, the Turner's Catalog or the whatever they call it. These are sturdy, they're substantial, they're durable, the wheels spin, but there's no bearing in there. So you have to just make sure you use some fine oil periodically to keep them moving. But that's the tool that was used to create these patterns. So I'll show how I use the Wagner tools. The next section of this piece, and I will send this piece around for all of you to look at, shows D-Way. And this is what the tool looks like.
I can get a little closer.
And if you see, there's a little sort of a semicircular ground tip. And this tool is applied to the wood. In a similar way, you're applying some pressure to the wood at about the center line, maybe a little lower, but you also sort of move the tool a little bit from right to left, maybe a little twist from right to left, until you get the complete bead. And you'll see on this demonstration piece, I have the larger to the next smaller, 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 smaller. And you'll notice that on some of the trees, there is simply a single bead line around each of the levels and then colored with a metallic marker or a marker of some sort. So you start with a single line, you can put a burn line, you could put a single bead, you can leave it natural color, you can use a color marker or dye or whatever you want to put a bead line around every level. So that's the D-Way tool. You can buy the handle, but frankly, you don't really need to use the handle. I usually use them just like this, holding it. The texturing tool, you want to texture at about 500, 600 RPM. The beading tool, you crank up the speed and you're applying just sort of a standard speed to do your turning. Yeah, Jim?
Can those be sharpened?
They can be sharpened. Thank you. The question is, can they be sharpened? They can be, and it's fairly easy because you simply put this flat portion right here on your grinder like this, and you just touch it on the grinder and it will give you a fresh, sharp surface. These are very easy to sharpen.
Sharp, the points on them, that when you roll that over, you get a very distinct edge on where it ends, and you can match that up and it makes a very square, nice corner.
Yeah. So Dick's point about the D-Way tools is that because these edges are so sharp, when you put them into the wood, you get such a crisp cut. And you can line up one bead next to the other one, next to the other one, and it gives you a nice sort of a trail to string some together. It's a good question. Did I wire burn it first and then color it, or did I color it and put the wire in last? I might have done it twice. I might have put the paint on first, or I might have put the wire and then maybe a little paint gets in there and then I put the wire on a second time. It's possible. But it's a great question because sometimes you want the lines in to define the space that you're going to put your texture. So there's a tree going around now with spiral wood burning around each of the layers. If I tried to put that spiraling on while it's in the lathe manually, without a track, without a slot, I'd be all over the place. So in that case, I put the line and I burned it, and then I put the wire spiral burn in that track. When I use the Wagner tool, I usually put the texturing in first because sometimes it'll drift a little bit. You have to hold it in that spot. And if you drift it and you've already put a line, you might go over that line. I tend to put the line of demarcation after I do the Wagner type texturing. And after I do this next, which is using it's called a decorating elf, okay? And this is a Henry Taylor tool, another one of our great British manufacturers, Henry Taylor, and it's got a rotating bit, cutter if you will. These are very similar to some of the bits that you can buy for your high-speed tools, your Dremel tools, your Fordham tools, things like that. They're a little different. The ones that come with this tool have a little bit of a collar. I don't know if you can see that. There's just a little bit of a collar there that prevents it from going in too far. Most of the Dremel tools, it's just a straight shaft. But this one's got a little...
Towards the headstock, I think it'll be better for you. There you go.
You see that? There's a little bit of a collar there. So, you could put a Dremel bit in this tool. This just pops in and out. There's a bearing in there, and that helps to let it turn freely. You need to put a little oil in there once in a while. But that tool produces the kind of pattern that you see here in these two areas. Nick Agar is a great friend to turning and is a great friend of many of us in this room. He's passed away. Nick actually demoed this ELF tool. And along with the tool, you can purchase two additional tools. One is a point tool, where you can, again, put those lines to demarc the spaces on each side of the actual texturing. And the ELF tool works best on end grain and if you have a cove type shape. So you can use an easy wood round tip carbide tool to make a little bit of a cove, or you can use a spindle gouge to make it a little cove. But they sold this particular little tool that you can use to make a little cove, and then the ELF tool is pressed in that area. It's rotating at high speed. To me, I'm not getting as crisp of a design, as crisp of a pattern as I am with the Wagner tool, but I also don't use this as much. I'm sure there are folks who probably have mastered this tool. I have not. And I don't have a lot of coves that I'm working with. I have used this tool on the end grain if I'm doing spinning tops, or if I'm doing like a bottom of a box or a top of a box lid or something like that, where you do an end grain. I think this is more appropriate for that type of turning decoration. But if you can add it to your arsenal, again, I think these are probably $40, $50, you know. Let me know if I'm off on that. But it also comes with different tips. This one is a kind of a cylindrical tip. Gives you different patterns. Different speeds will give you different patterns. Different amounts of pressure will give you different patterns. And which direction you move your tool will give you different patterns. Frankly, the type of patterns are endless. And I'm showing you on, you know, what I'm doing on trees, but the fact of the matter is you can use these tools on boxes, on bowls, on spinning tops, on vessels, on anything you want to do, on magic wands, on handles. So really that's part of my message tonight, is just play. If you have these tools, play with them. If you haven't used them for a while, get them out and just play around for a while. And the more you play, the more fun you're gonna have. So that's the ELF tool. The point was, you can make this tool probably easier than the other ones because it simply is a handle with a shaft. You can fortify that with a little bit of metal here to make it easier to slide on the tool rest or whatever you're using. But it's a tiny bearing, and these cutters are readily available everywhere. So if you have a little bit of experience, it's not hard to make that tool.
There's actually a kit available to make that tool through Highland Hardware.
Okay.
It's
Highland Hardware has a kit
Hardware.
to show you how to make that.
Georgia, they have, it's about $35 for the kit. And you just, yeah, it's got directions on it. It's pretty easy to do.
And then the final, so that's the elf, and then the final accent, I will call it, rather than, I guess texturing as well, is with the Sorby, kind of the mini spiraling tool. And this is another tool that I've had for a long time, but I haven't used it very much. And I find that I'm attracted to tools where I feel like I have some control over. And with the ELF tool and the Sorby tool, I feel like they're in charge. Probably because I haven't practiced with them quite as much. But this is the Sorby. How many of you have Sorby spiraling tools? They've been around for a long time. And the big ones have been around for a real long time. And they come with 3, 4, 5 different spiraling heads, spiraling wheels, and you can use those on bowls and vessels and larger items. This tool, basically you put it on the tool rest, and I use it at a slight angle. You'll notice it's at a slight bevel angle, and you have to keep it a fair distance away from the tool rest so that this flat rests on the tool rest and you get close to the turning. But then you simply push that again into the wood at about center line, at about 400 or 500 RPM, create a little bit of a pattern, kind of like cutting threads almost. And then once that spins and you get it in the groove, you can go back and forth a few times, applying the same amount of pressure. This one was tilted, I think, in this direction. And this one was tilted to give you this spiraling type of a pattern. How many of you would say you're really good at using Sorby tools? Okay. We've got a couple people here, so if you're interested more in the Sorby tools, check with Marie, check with Bob.
Please.
Yeah.
That's one thing that most of us don't do much of, making sample of what the work that we're going to do so we can practice on. And I would recommend that, especially if you're trying a new piece or a new series of tools, work on a piece first, try it out thoroughly. What the color does, what the texturing does, like you have in there, so you have a record of what you've done.
It's a great point. So Frank's basically saying, make yourself a storyboard or a story stick or a practice piece. Don't try out a texturing tool on that beautiful something you just spent days finishing, hoping that you're gonna get a nice texture on it. Because there's a good chance first time won't work that way. But also, you wanna be able to replicate it, and you might be able to, in today's world, take a photograph of it and take a photograph next to the design so that you can remember what angle or what speed. All of these things are important. Again, I know my friends in the ornamental world, the amount of time they spent documenting and in trying to retain the information so they can replicate patterns, we don't generally do that very much in woodturning. Yeah.
Don't ask me how I know this, but I would not suggest using the white rolling pin to try out the pattern.
He's not recommending using the wife's rolling pin, the wooden rolling pin, to capture the detail here. Bob?
Just remember, whatever texturing tool you're using, you put it on a different species of wood, it's going to react differently.
It's another great point. So getting back to what we discussed earlier, the type of wood, the species of wood, whether it's wet, whether it's dry, the humidity level in your shop, I mean, it could have an impact on how that cutter is going to be cutting into the wood. I mentioned cherry, and this is all cherry because it's a fairly tight grain. It's sort of a medium dense hard wood that takes to some of this detail. Again, the piece that's going around, but also doing a demonstration on this thing, you can see why I struggle a little bit with where do you want to start? Because we could spend an hour on the Wagner tool. We could spend an hour on the Sorby tool. We could spend an hour turning shapes and things like this. I just wanted to give you a little flavor of this, so please don't hesitate to call me, or if you want to get together and play on doing some of this stuff. If you don't have the tools and would like to give it a try, I'm not going to loan them to you, but we can find a place where we can play for a while, and so you can decide if you want to use them or not. So I want to take the last 20 minutes or so,
About what you have.
about 20 minutes, to actually do some of this texturing. Does that work? Has this been okay, the way we've talked about it so far? Because like I said, I've done this demo for a couple of clubs on trees, and at the end of the day, we get a tree done, but we don't have very much time for these other kind of alternative types. The other thing I want to mention, on these trees, I've not done any carving, I've not done any piercing, I've not done any texturing with Dremel tools, any stippling. There's a million other ways to decorate your work, to decorate trees. I don't call them Christmas trees because I want people to buy them all year long and put them out all year long. But that's my canvas for now, these trees. If you make boxes and you want to use texturing tools, play with that. Or you make something else, play with that. But I'm not suggesting this is the only way to, to decorate it. Yeah, big country.
Not a critique, but it looked like on some of the trees on the bases, they had cracked. Was that from turning them green, or letting them dry, or are you primarily doing it with dry wood, or?
I'm primarily using dry wood. And the question was, there were a crack in maybe some of the bases of a couple of them. Cracks used to scare me. I just don't worry about them too much. And sometimes even on the bottom, I'll put natural crack. Some people like the cracks. It gives them a sense that it's not plastic or not. But one of the things I do on the bottom of all of them, I try to leave the wood natural. If you color it or paint it or whatever else, I love to leave the bottom the natural color so people can see what kind of wood that is, or that it is wood. But, great question.
So although it's not from drying, if you have a piece of crack, you'll just turn it around.
It could be, but I have, if I put a piece on here now and I see a little crack and I've started to measure it, I'm probably not going to throw it away. I'm going to probably finish it, and it might end up with a family member instead of a customer. So, but if it's a small crack, or if it's in the middle of the wood and it really doesn't look like it's going to go any further, I'll say, hey, you got a money back guarantee if you ever, you want to bring it back. Or you buy wood from RJR Hardwoods, and they're guaranteed not to have any cracks or ever crack for the life for your lifetime, right, guys?
Yeah.
All right. So let's take out the Wagner tool, and as I said, the tool itself needs to be presented pretty much straight on at the center line, and it's best if you slightly angle it as you're presenting it so it kind of starts on one of the edges, and then you level it off and press it in. Gives you a little bit of an edge to have it scoot. It wants to move. It wants to go in places. And this wood, I just simply turn this, and I think I sand it at 100 grit or something like that. Just when you're doing texturing of any kind, you want to finish the wood to your final sanded finish before you start doing texturing, because you can't go back. You can't go and sand in between and things like that, or sand afterwards. And you're not going to want to sand over the texture because you'll end up losing it in most cases. So get it down to 400 or whatever you want to, your finished surface is, and then start to apply the tools. So this says 561. So 561. So I'm putting the tool on the tool rest. To me, that looks a little high. I'm going to lower that a little bit. It doesn't make a lot of shavings, and it doesn't make a lot of noise. You guys see that okay? All right. So I'm holding it on the tool rest flat. I have it against me, so I'm kind of leaning in, and it's using my girth. It's using my girth to apply some pressure here. Okay? So I'm gonna let that left edge hit first. And I'm applying increasing amounts of pressure. See, it's skidded a little bit to the left. And now it's skidded a little bit to the right. I'll do that again. Apply it to the wood. And that's it. Pretty exciting? That was the, let's say that is fewer teeth per inch. This is 12 teeth per inch, and that's a 3/8 inch wide roller. Yes, sir. So the question is, okay, I'm directly into the straight surface, but if I'm putting it into a tree that is on an angle like that, I have the tool on that angle, and I'm applying it at that angle.
So you hold it at the angle?
At the angle that you try to keep it as straight and as flush and at the center line, but it's a great question. At the whatever angle you're going in.
Paul, if you notice that the indentations are not deep enough, do you find it easy enough to go back in and retract to push again?
It doesn't work well to go back with this tool. With the Sorby tool, you can get away with that because there's a track and the rollers are getting into that single track. The other thing I didn't mention with the Sorby tool, you can put that Sorby tool in the vertical position and leave a different kind of pattern on things. So I didn't get into that. So that was the thicker one. This will be the thinner one. And this has, I think, 16 TPI. The other one had 12. So again, depending on your preference. So you can make it faster, you can make it slower, you can see what the tool does, you can see what it does on the wood. These cutters are fairly consistent here on this piece of cherry. Question is, can you push too hard? I would say I have not found that to be possible, but you want to make sure your chuck is tight and you take a deep breath. Because usually I'm holding my breath when I'm doing that and going in there. But I don't think you can really over push that particular tool. That's not true with a lot of the other ones. But with this texturing tool, you may be able to get a deeper pattern. So, and this is another tool that comes with, or you can buy, I think this comes with the D-Way tools actually. But to find a sharp tool that you can just put a little defining line in there, kind of raise up the tool rest, move it closer, and turn up the speed. So it's sort of a negative rake type scrape on the side. It's a very simple technique, but makes a nice difference, right? It really makes it pop. The other thing you should do, I don't know if I brought a brush with, typically I would bring a little natural bristle brush and just while it's spinning, just brush that out, because you don't want to sand over it. I wouldn't try steel wool or anything like that. You really want that to be the final texture.
Steel wool, you might lose your finger too.
Steel wool, yeah. Plus you might get metal fibers stuck in there. It's not a pretty thing. In terms of coloring, you can use whatever markers you want. I use some color markers. I know Bonnie Klein years ago, when she did a lot of spinning tops, she was talking about Tombow markers. The important thing is that these have sort of a brush tip, okay, versus a kind of a straight, hard tip. This one happens to have both. But to apply the colors, you kind of turn it on at a slow speed, and just using that, because you don't want to ruin the tip of the marker every time you do one of these. You kind of aim it down and then just come across and apply the color. Try to stay within those lines, and you can go back and forth as much as you want. Generally, you don't want to saturate it because you do want to see the pattern. If you saturate it with the marker, the pattern kind of gets lost if the whole thing becomes a solid blue. Make sense? So that's a Tombow marker. This is a Sharpie metallic permanent marker. And I have it aimed downward, and just, the Sharpies flow real nice. You can go back and forth. Some folks will actually put the texturing on after the color. You could put the color on first and then put the texturing. To me, you're kind of applying moisture to the wood and then trying to, it just doesn't work for me logically, so I don't do it that way. And same thing with the smaller one here now. And you can blend colors, you can put bands next to each other, whatever your creativity does for you.
What speed bump?
I would say right there is about 280, 250. Some lathes won't even go small, like your slowest speed possible.
Paul, do you have the brush?
The what?
The one with you that had brush? Do you have the brush?
The brush on the marker? Yeah. If you go to Dick Blick's or Blick's Artist Supplies and you just Google brush tip permanent markers, or even metallic brush tip markers, I like the metallics on this kind of stuff. They'll give you more than you'll imagine. The other thing I wanted to show here is...
About 2 minutes.
Okay. We're almost... so we've got those lines in there. If you wanted to burn lines in addition to that, these are some homemade handles that I made. I'm sure you've seen these in Woodcraft and other places with the little wooden ball, different colors. They tell you those are the different thicknesses of a wire. That's kind of a cool technique. Usually mine are all tangled up, so you can use any wire, steel wire. People are using piano wire, guitar string wire. I've used copper wire. Some of them will break, but that's okay. You get a roll that's got 100 feet of wire on it, you're going to have that till your estate sale anyways. So here's where I turn it up. Okay, everybody, timber! And again, it's consistently here, consistent burn because it's all the same diameter. So that's sharp tip, texturing, coloring, burning. 4 different techniques on those little areas. I'll use the D-Way beading tools. So for the D-Way tool, for the beading tool, you want to turn up the speed. Yeah.
If you're gonna use those wires, so that the wire doesn't jump.
Right, that's what I did.
He already had,
I used that tool. But yeah, anytime you use wire, you don't want to just put that on there without a little groove first, because it'll be wanting to pull all over the place. So just a very sharp line, doesn't have to be thick, just enough to get you started.
Never wrap your fingers around it either.
Yeah, don't be wrapping your fingers around the wire. Okay, so now with the D-Way tools, so you're presenting the tool this way, there's an angle, so it's sort of a negative ray kind of to it. You apply it right there. Starts out with a couple of lines, you keep pushing inward, and now I'm kind of moving from left to right, right to left a little bit, clear out some of the shavings in that slot, and I'm watching the top of the bead until I don't see any shine to it, which means there's no flat to it. And that's it. Different sizes, different size beads, same technique for all the D-Way tools. The color, you can apply the same kind of strategy to that. You can apply the burning to that. You can leave it naked. So I'm just going to use the Sharpie marker here. Kind of. So there, it's kind of a two-step process. I'd probably burn that a little more. You just use the beading tool and the wire, because the beading tool provides that accent on each side of it. That wire gets hot. The ELF tool, as I said, it comes with a little bit of a tool to make a cove. So I'm just going to create a little cove. You can use whatever tool you want to make this cove. And the ELF tool works great on end grain, and you can put these little coves on the end grain too. I'm going to use the round one. And this, turn down the speed. I'm going to lower the tool rest because you want to be able to angle the tool upward. You can also do it downward, but I find that these things can slip out when you're holding it pointed down. So I'm usually holding it in this orientation. And you want to kind of start, let the tool decide now I'm going to the other side of the cove. So that one gives you a little different sound, and you get a different texture. You can use the same technique for creating a little bit of a line. Also gets rid of a little bit of the frazzly stuff. Here's definitely where I would use a little, maybe a brass brush or a natural brush. Kind of a different pattern there. And finally, the Sorby. at about center line, moving the tool rest back because I want to rest this flat base on that tool rest. And I'm coming straight into the wood. Looks like I might be a little high. And I'm going to start with it relatively slow, let's just say. Close to 500-ish. And I'm going straight in. And that's first pass spiraling. And as I said, you can do that. You can try to go back and forth and go and press harder and go deeper in there and get that spiraling pattern.
5 minutes.
And play with that. All right? So those are the, I haven't brought the chatter tool. That's another technique that I used to use, but again, you don't get a consistent pattern and you don't get a kind of a replica, and there's tear out, things like that. I really prefer the techniques that I've showed you here tonight. Are there any final questions?
Do you have a preferred finish you put over when you use the markers?
Thank you. Yes. The question is finish. Every one of those trees is finished with a clear wood finish gloss or semi-gloss spray. I've been using Deft on a lot of my wood turning projects for 25 years. My mentor used Deft for everything. Deft was, I understand Deft was acquired by PPG, I believe. And so you may not see the cans like this anymore. The cans they look like that. They're Prolux. And there's a little circle here that says same Deft formula, new name. I get this at Ace Hardware. I haven't seen it at Home Depot or, who does? Menards has it. Home Depot does not. Woodcraft no longer seems to carry Deft, at least the one in Downers Grove. The difference is that was $9.99 a bottle, and these are $11.99. But you get a fair amount of, and I just spray it in thin coats, multiple coats, probably 4 or 5 coats on each one of those trees. Doesn't take a lot of skill. Just look up, if you haven't done can spray painting in a while. And I will say, when the can's full, it comes out a lot heftier than when it's almost empty. So be careful with that.
Paul, do you do that on the lathe spinning?
I do not. So when I'm done with the tree and they fall to the ground, the last thing I do is I take, while this is still in chuck, and the trunk is finished, and I've sanded this, and I've now applied some texture and color to the tree. I will now remove this part, and I'll also work on the shape of the top of the tree. Give it a good shape. Sand that, and it's still going to be sturdy enough to do that, using my spindle gouge. Then I use my parting tool here. I use a handsaw for the final 1/4 inch or so to get it off. I turn this upside down in my hand, and I use a sander, a power sander, to sand the bottom of the tree, 2 or 3 different grits till I'm satisfied. Put my name on it with a Sharpie marker, put the type of wood. Then I take the